Yo yo, welcome to another stream. Waiting for the YouTubes to light up. Alright, so title of the stream is Escaping Domestic Abuse, Charity, Freelance, Job. So these are pretty different things. I did a long stream on startups, and yesterday's stream was back, same title, Escaping Domestic Abuse Startups, so doing a startup to escape domestic abuse. And then I went back to the open source development stuff, and yeah, so now back to another slavery, domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse type stream. So, somewhat related, startup. So here's roughly my estimated velocity as far as building open source stuff, which is my hobby. It was my career. It's what I feel is my calling. So I was sort of doing a startup here from the beginning of 2018 until I left my apartment and then moved into my car. And then a little afterwards, it took some time to get adjusted to life on the street. And then I was just working, I found opportunity in a work center, and then my former employer served me, and then I spent time working on a defense for myself until about April, and in March, pandemic hit. And in the Bay Area, we sort of knew that there was a pandemic coming, like, as early as January. And so, yeah. Wait, this is 2019, my bad. So 2019, wait, is that right? So what I just said was 2020. So yeah, there was still the same loss of productivity. That X is where they served me, or where pandemic hit. So they served me like November of 2019. So the end of 2018, I think I had let my Hackerspace membership go. I was at the work center. It was a pretty cold winter. So I got the job at a restaurant. My productivity went up. Left the restaurant. Productivity went down. I think I went back to the Hackerspace. Back to the co-working space. And then March of 2020, I got another job until about August. So this is startup, this is job, this is job. And the work center stuff was sort of, actually we'll call that freelance, because it was more of a freelancing kind of arrangement. So at the restaurant, job. And then after, so then basically here I wasn't really doing startup so much as just, working on, like, okay, not really employable anymore due to the legal action by my employer. And so I was kind of optimistically working on, legal stuff. So what is that? That's just like personal. And then like August or so, I started thinking, okay, I could be like a mentor or something. So this was Startup E, but it's more like doing open source stuff and hoping for some kind of, basically figuring out how to do marketing and finding different channels and figuring out how to put offers together and putting together serious offers, but Probably not good offers, not offers that people were interested in taking. And then this whole time I've had Patreon. And I've had at most like 3 people on Patreon, and then I had, you know, random people give me little gifts and things like that. So, you know, in a way this is kind of charity. But the thing is, I'm trying to give value for it. It's not really a startup. It's like, you know, the streams category is educational. And I've always been, like, throughout this whole time on Twitter, I've been comedy, which is truth and pain, and truth is sort of educational. So, yeah, the whole creator economy thing has kind of been, you know, slowly growing. I'm not trying to be a creator. Like, I remember right when I was starting out, there was that article about the guy who lived with his mom, and he was like pursuing his dream to be a creator, and like everyone in the country was mocking him. Like, I'm sure that was predictive programming and kind of a psyop to get people mocking him, sort of like Boomhauer on King of the Hill. So, like, people are yelling at me like, oh, just get a job. Like, clearly you could get a job right now. It looks like it, but I'm experiencing political violence through the courts. I've had the courts weaponized against me. And so if I go to get a job, HR will say, oh, you're too much of a problem when they do the background check. You know, it's like a violent felon versus a non-violent felon. Someone who has committed domestic violence. I did a stream a couple weeks ago, getting a job with domestic violence. So you can refer to that, and we can just have me stop explaining myself on that matter. You know, it's not on the table unless I can go to court against my former employer. But with what money, right? Like, I'm not complaining or playing victim. I'm just like, there are constraints. Like, when you're doing HTML, you can't call operating system functions, you know? It's a constraint. And so, yeah, doing a startup would be the best. I don't want charity. Nobody wants charity. But, you know, like that picture that I drew, like, if you have $10, you can only go so far. You know, that gets you 2 bus rides, a coffee, and you've got $2 left. If you've got $100, you can go a little bit further. If you got $1,000, you can go a little bit further, right? So, like, it costs a certain amount of money to get a job. Usually, say, $100 or $200, because you've got to, you know, get a shower, dress well. If you don't have a gym membership, you got to buy one. That's like $20 to $50 a month, maybe $10 to $50 a month, depending. If you just, like, you know, you might get lucky. So then it's bus rides, call it $4, $10, whatever, 2 or 3 trips. Food, you know, if it's a few days until the interview, you don't want to starve until the interview, right? So something like $100 or $200 to interview for one job. You can pack together maybe job searching into a couple days and interviewing into a few days, and maybe start your job in a week or 2, get paid in 2 or 3 weeks, right? So it's going to be like 21 days at the very minimum until you get a paycheck. You know, it might be 7 until you start. Like, at the very best, I was able to walk into a restaurant, talk with the hiring manager, take the interview that day, get offered the job after like a day, get a call back, start work in a day or 2. So I mean, like, at best it's going to be 3 or 4 days. And if you're looking at like $10 a day for food, that's if you have a kitchen. Maybe you can eat for $10 a day. If you have to eat out, then it's going to be more like $20 a day, right? So no matter what, it's going to be a few $100s to start a job. Like, that's just how it is. Like, this is This is the physics of homelessness, that work that I started a couple years ago. And it's now basically being called the Homeless Data Project. And I've done a couple streams on this subject. So it's all about quantifying, what works, what will get results, but then, people just don't know, and so it's an educational project. So when I talk about doing, it's not really a startup, but it's an educational progress. It's like a mission project, if you will. So, that's probably a better way to put it. And here, it was more of a mission than a startup as well. And here, it's just constantly felt like I've been distracted from my mission. When I was building the case against my former employer, I was making, that's the root of the Homeless Data Project. When I'm working work centers and retail jobs and whatnot, I'm totally fine and happy with minimum wage, living in my car, being able to keep all my paperwork up to date. I almost had to get fired from this job because I didn't have my ID. It was during pandemic. It was hard to get to the DMV, and and then the HR person felt like they had a desire to get rid of me as well. So freelancing, it's one we haven't really touched too much on. That's basically doing a job, but with your own time and materials. So at best, freelancing is going to have the exact same cost as going to a job and showing up, but then there's going to be the risk of being exploited and not being paid. In Mountain View, there's the Day Worker Center, which is where I worked. And the very reason the Day Worker Center was established 25 years ago is because of situations people would be waiting in front of Home Depot for work. People would pick them up, take them to a work site, they would work for the day, and then they wouldn't pay them, and there'd be no way to track them down. And then these are, usually people who don't have a lot of money to pursue legal action, exact same situation that I'm in with my corporate employer. They committed perjury with the knowledge that I would not be able to do anything about it. And it's the exact same situation. And so that's why the Day Worker Center, a huge part of why it exists. It's just a minimal layer between workers and employers. It's a level above freelance, and it gave me experience I needed to get a restaurant job. Now, 15, 20 years ago, I had jobs in restaurants and grocery stores, but that's not recent enough to go onto a resume, right? So here I was then able to say I did moving, gardening, this and that. I'm not a snowflake office worker. I can get my hands dirty. That's important to service and retail employers. They serve snowflake office people all day, and they think that they don't have grit, et cetera, et cetera. Whether that's true or not, the stream about Midwestern haters, there's a little bit of hating everywhere. And so it might be the same mindset. For a lot of people, it takes work to get into corporate. For me, it took work to get into corporate. I wasn't born into it by any means. So, so freelance, oftentimes it's net 30. If you get lucky, your client will pay you right away. But so you start work here, and then you send in, usually you do some work, and then you send an invoice to say it takes you, just because the graph is small, 7 days to do some work. we send an invoice. So day 37 is when you can expect some income to come. This is all about expected returns. It could go better. You know, one can hope it'll go better. Maybe it usually goes better, but this is what we're looking at. So, you know, charity. So something else with mission, we can kind of pick apart charity a little bit. So there's begging. Right? Standing on the side of the freeway with the sign, begging, going to gas stations, begging, maybe telling sob stories. Oh, I'm stuck, you know, da-da-da, when they could just ask for 20 bucks and some people would just give it anyway. Like, you don't got to make up a story like that. So there, you know, there's begging. That's just straight up scamming. I wasn't even going to mention this one. So you don't want to beg, so you scam. But also there's busking. So what is busking? That's when someone sits on the side of the street with their guitar case open and plays the guitar. So students do that. Nobody criticizes a student doing that. If somehow a homeless guy is able to keep a guitar without it being stolen, he could do that. But then because he looks homeless, people might still look down on him. But, you know, it's an honest, you know, honest way. I'm not trying to quote honest, but it's an honest way to make a living. And it's sort of like mission. Like, it might not be your mission to play the guitar, but it might be, you know, you might actually be a musician. But, you know, like, I knew a lot of students at, I didn't know a lot, but I knew like maybe 5 students at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And they would legit go out busking. Like, they would just go to, you know, transit stations and whatnot and busk. And these are students of music, you know, people with well-to-do parents, but they're making a living, right? And it's not like envy or to say the well-to-do is unearned. Like, it could be they started a restaurant and, you know, it might be second-generation immigrants making a good life, but the child is a student of music and they go out busking in a subway station. Is that wrong? Some might say, oh, well, they're taking opportunity from a homeless, you know, you make your opportunity, right? So for them, music might be their mission, so busking might be their mission. So for me, doing this educational content, doing this, or lessons or lectures or whatever you will, doing my open source stuff, you know, this is a busking in a way. And Patreon enables busking, you know, buy me a coffee, Venmo. It's like throwing $1 into a guitar case, right? So I didn't think to include that on the title. And it's not really begging, even though it could be called begging, and most people don't know the word busking. And, you know, scamming, you know, is selling knockoff perfume out of a trunk scamming? You know it's knockoff when you buy it, right? Maybe you just buy it because you respect the person's hustle. Maybe it actually smells okay, you know? Like, you might buy it for any number of reasons. So that's not any of these things. That's sort of hustling. And forgive me if I'm using that word slightly wrong, but, you know, like, I hustled water. It was a heat wave, and I went to the beach. You know, I invested in a bunch of water, and I knew how much I had to sell to break even, which selling water is really crappy. Like, who wants to sell water? If I were to do it again, I would give the water away and have a donation thing. But anyway, because some people gave me a bunch of extra money, and I ended up walking away with like $10 in profit, and I had a bunch of gallons of water left, which was totally fine because I'm going to drink it eventually anyway. So, you know, I came out basically had like $10 and a bunch of gallons of water because I invested too much. I didn't know my market. Like, I did sell a lot less than I thought I would have. But yeah, and it was during pandemic too, so like some people were weird about like masking and touching, and you know what I'm saying? Like, pandemic was an extremely rough time, and it definitely, like I was definitely starting to make my way. Like, this job was just kind of being secured before pandemic and the legal action. Like, if it weren't for pandemic, I would have been just fine. I would have probably got a second job. I made a lot more at this job because of tips. But yeah, so this is escaping domestic abuse, not escaping homelessness. So how can we tie those together? So, there's the whole thing of choosing to be homeless. Like, during all of this time that I lived in my car, was I choosing to be homeless? And now, staying with a relative, am I not homeless? I don't have a lease. I don't have any rights. I can be threatened to be thrown to the street. I can be physically threatened with no recourse. If the police are called for some reason, then, it's going to be an extremely difficult time explaining that I'm not the aggressor. Like, that is how, narcissistic abuse works. Like, these people have two sides to them. One that everybody knows, and one when they're exercising their coercive control. It's another term that I learned in the last month or two. So it's like I knew instinctively not to come back to live with, I called them alcoholic parents, but it's actually, narcissist versus narcissistic, empath versus empathic. I know I'm running out of space here, but narcissist and empath is a scale. And everyone has some narcissistic traits, so it's not just a scale, but a spectrum, probably. So, like, in some ways, people can be more narcissistic. In some ways, they can be more empathetic, But there's not like there's a clinical term of narcissist. Now, in the last stream on startups, I went into this a little bit deeper, so refer to the first 20 minutes of that stream for more details. But yeah, basically, narcissist, and then biblically it's reprobate. And, you could also say demon. Like, legion of demons inhabit narcissists. So narcissist, like a straight-up narcissist, clinically, is biblically someone who's been given over to a reprobate mind, where, God's gone, they can live in their delusion, whatever. But, like, so it's like the cops show up, and this person puts on their, they play victim. This is all like in the beginning of that stream. So I don't necessarily want to reiterate too much, but so you've got this kind of situation at your family of origin, and so you leave it and you go out to the street. Most people are sympathetic to someone who's being physically abused, but not this, like, mental abuse. Chinese water torture. I still talk about this in that stream. I hate to keep saying that as well. Like, should I talk about it or should I refer to the other stream, right? This is where producing content would be good. But, because, you could clip the two together, make one in-depth video. But, people will be like, oh, just, if they've never experienced narcissistic abuse, they'll just be like, oh, just make amends, just, like, having shelter is better than staying on the street. Well, no, it's not if you're literally being tortured. And again, I went into, connecting the idea of torture to this in the stream. Amnesty International report on torture, 11 elements. So, at some point, you're not choosing to be homeless. You're choosing to not be tortured, and the only place you have left is the street. So, which street should you live on? Should you live on the street where you were born? Should you live on the street where you graduated from school? Should you live on the street where you paid the most taxes? So, just because there's a lot of homeless people on the streets where you paid a lot of taxes and people really hate the homeless people there, should you be forced to leave? And if you're forced to leave, then which of those other options do you go to? You just go to some state where you haven't paid taxes and drain their homeless system? I think most people would say that's not fair. So for me, I've been paying taxes in San Francisco Bay Area for a decade. You know, it's where I went right after school. It's where all my social connections are. If I were to have a support system, it would be there. It's not with my relatives. It's not with my elementary or high school friends. Even though there might be one or two left, you know, it's not with the people who I worked with before I went to university, because I went in my early 20s. You know, those might be allies in a sense, but these are people who I haven't known for a decade plus. And it's like a lot of them would rather bully me and see me die than help me out. Even though some of them might say, oh, I tried to help you, but you just, you know, this or that. And it's always like calling me out in public on my social media, where it's like, it just feels like clout chasing and cyberbullying, if you will. So, you know, my support system is thousands of miles away. So talk about, you know, time to get a job, cost to get a job, right? Well, just get a job where you are and make the best with it. Staying in this home, well, you've made it this far, right? God, it's like, you guys don't know how sleep deprived I am. Oh, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, right? I know, right? I know. So, like, the whole thing about it is just, because I don't have a lease, I'm not paying rent, I don't have a guaranteed place to stay. Like, even compared to when I was staying in my car, like, in the Bay Area, one can very comfortably stay in their car. Here, there's winter. So it's like, when I was in my car, I didn't have to walk on eggshells for anybody. I just, you know, drove the speed limit, kept my registration good, you know. It was fine. I was at peace at night. I never had any trouble sleeping. You know, I basically did van life, you know? Van life in a car. It was totally fine. Some van lifers even started off in their car, like the Cat Lady van. So, you know, it's like homelessness versus unhoused versus unsheltered. So one project that I'm doing here is Urban Camping Pro. So that's a book that I have on GitHub, and it's going to be just name your own price. It's somewhat written. It might need more content, but it's it needs editing mostly. So that's, again, mission work, and that work I was doing probably here, personal. So yeah, I mean, this is mission. So I mean, I'm a pretty mission-driven person, but I can get down and gritty and put my mission down, even though, you know, I don't necessarily want to. But of course, we're in a pretty wicked and fallen society, so people will say, oh, boo-hoo, put your mission down, you know. At least you're not in Africa, buddy. You know, one of my bosses has literally said that to me. So, yeah, I sound like a big complaining snowflake, but I'm just trying to, like, give an overview of, you know, why don't you leave? Why don't you just get a job? That's situation to situation. I did get a job. You know, the accusations that I'm above getting a job, absolutely false. Beyond this point, when I got a history, you know, a record of violence that I would love to fight using these data tools, you know, I became unemployable, at least for a few years. Like, the order expires in April of this year, so it's still active. So maybe like 2 years after April, I can start thinking about getting a regular job, because I can explain. But the thing is, like, you know, getting a job with domestic abuse, like, you know, I don't want to sit here and explain myself. I explained myself already. So go watch that. Yeah, so, you know, this is not so much begging, even though I have begged when I was like totally out of food and everything. but I'm just hoping to get support to like get the first mileage into, you know, concretely I would love to move back into my car and go home. You know, pandemic is basically over. Oh, am I spreading medical misinformation? Like, you know, allegedly pandemic is basically over, but it's like winter, who knows if it's going to come back. Like, I've tried to leave here a couple times and it's just not worked out for various reasons. But like, I need, you know, this is the money and this is the distance. You know, I need money to go the distance. I need, you know, if I could move into my car here, I would. It's just like during the summer it's hot and humid. During the winter it's, you know, cold, and, you know, it's not quite a van where you can put a heater into it. It's a car. So if I could find a way to get a van, I could move into a van here in the winter. But I would rather just go home where my support system is, where I've been for a decade. Like, I left the Midwest for solid reason. Like, I mean, I'm vegan. I'm just not a culture fit here. I mean, it's not to say there aren't a few people here and there. It's not to say that I can't find my tribe here. But ultimately, whatever I do here, I'm going to be constantly in the, you know, trying to get into the position to jump and go back home. Like, I even left the Bay Area once for Denver, and I went back to the Bay Area because Denver is an excellent place too. I mean, I could do it, but I'm just more of a coastal person. So that's, you know, that's a little bit of me personally. But in general, you know, so you could do startup, but we talked about why that might be challenging. You could do freelance. That's probably challenging for similar reasons to a startup. You could do job. That may or may not work. For most people, that's probably a good option. And, you know, that's not like, you know, not everybody. Sometimes you just have a partner who, you know, doesn't want you working, etc. And then, you know, there's charity, and then there's, you know, mission, which is busking, you know, basically busking. And a lot of online business is hustling. So that's sort of startup-y. So it's, you know, begging is just, oh, give me money, boo-hoo, I'm a victim. Busking is trying to, you know, do things that are valuable. So you'll be like, yeah, here's a couple bucks for your work. Like, you've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this, you know. A couple bucks would help you get to where you're going. So, I mean, I didn't set out for that. I should say I didn't have the clarity of setting out for that, you know. It's, you know, startup versus mission. Like, it's just about, like, where your values are. Like, for me, part of my mission is giving a lot of stuff away for free, and for startup, it's about making money. And, you know, for me, you know, some companies do give away, like, some of their software for open source because they know that their own values are their special sauce. So for me, it's a tough one because, like, you know, doing a startup in poverty, funding stuff in poverty, that's, like, definitely a side mission. As I did a talk on this channel called Escaping the Toilet Bowl of Poverty or something, where it's like you're swirling down into a vortex the closer you get to the center, which is basically, I was describing this in using a different metaphor. But my real work is software engineering and data engineering, data tools, like, you know, making tools to materialize these kinds of points. You know, making development tools that run on, you know, low-end software, or, you know, I got a computer science degree to figure out how to make rules engines work and, you know, stuff like that. So anyway, I don't want to keep rambling, but, you know, I tried to wrap it up once already. But yeah, so it's like escaping domestic abuse through charity, freelancing, getting a job, and point that I added was mission. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it, and see you soon. Bye.